Good evening, ladies. This is your online lecture for today. Your goals are two things. One, we're going to make sure you're good on your blanks by following along with your notes for just the Great Schism. So I'm just going to cover the Great Schism in lecture. And then I also want to introduce you to IDs or identifications, how they are done, model one, and then have you complete the other one. So let's take a look at that sheet that I gave you today in class. So please take that out. Okay, and I just want to look at the example on the next page and talk about what an ID is. Okay, you've done IDs in the past, I'm pretty sure, with myself or Miss A, but basically you're looking at who, what, when, where of one of the big ideas from a unit, okay? And then your analysis, it says, so what? And that's another way of saying why, or analysis, why is this important? So for now, don't worry about this section. We'll talk about that when we get to the Renaissance. Let's go to this example. So think about it like this. Ideas are the most important ideas from a chapter, and you're writing a summary of those ideas to help you explain succinctly, in as few words as possible, what that is. So for instance, let's take a look at the Black Plague. We start with who's involved. The Black Plague impacted nearly all of Europe after it arrived in Italian port cities from trading ships that picked up the disease from China. Okay, so that's who, and what's the structure look like? So I'm going to have you get out a sheet of paper, and your paper will look basically like this. You're going to title it Chapter 11, Middle Ages Unit IDs, and then you would look at your study guide. So your study guide I gave you today, and you have these IDs, right? So for each bolded term, you have an ID. I said to skip number 1 for now. I said you didn't have to do number 2. You can just put C handout. So you can do that. Set up your page. You're skipping number 1. You can say C IDs handout, for example. And that's the one I'm going to go over with you right now. And then you can put this last one, and we're going to do that one together. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and set up your page. Okay, and I'm going to return to the example. So we talked about the who, then we think about the what. We talked today in class about how the plague was a disease carried by fleas on rats, and it was deadly. When? Impacted Europe greatly during the middle of the 14th century, the 1350s. Where? It says state if not done so yet. In this case, we've already described where, so we don't need to. And then the most important part is the so what. And we want to think about it in terms of the major ideas of history. How did this impact the society, economy, politics, and religion? And the goal is, you don't have to talk about all 4, but we want to hit on 2. So I went through the so what here, and how it impacted religion, economy, society. You can pause that one and take a look at that, but the so what is the most important thing. And then if you put it all together, it looks like this, and I'm just going to take this for our viewing sake, and I'm going to copy it. You don't have to do this, but this is what a finished ID would look like. It will look like that, okay? So it's a study tool. It's the most important ideas from the chapter. It'll really help you study for the test. So what we're going to focus on in the next 5 minutes is reviewing the Great Schism and then writing an ID for it. So I'm going to have you return to your notes. You took notes on this lecture over the summer, and I'm just going to briefly go over a few of the items and have you fill in the blanks as we go. So make sure you got your notes out and make sure your blanks are right. Alright? Okay, so here's the content to write our ID, our third ID, the Great Schism. We're talking about the late medieval church, and the second part of this lecture talks about the 100 Years' War, but I'm going to focus on the late medieval church and the Great Schism. In order to understand all of this, you got to understand how society is organized, and it's organized around this idea of feudalism, which we'll talk more about, but you remember from last year how a feudalist society works. Essentially, you got the king on top, the people connected to the king, and then the people with very few rights at the bottom, very, very small amounts of land rights, and generally they're always under the authority of the people above them. Okay? Today's history lesson has 3 contestants. We have the Holy Roman Church and clergy, known as the Church, the state and monarchies, known as the state, and the newly empowered people. Okay, so those are our 3 blanks. If we did this lecture in class, it would involve an activity where you divide into 3 groups, but because we're doing that we're doing it as an online lecture, we don't have that. So we'll skip this, and we'll skip this. We'll skip this. Okay, so ecclesiastical, or in other words, the church breakdown. So the church, another name for it is the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire. You can make a note for that. That was on your map test. Breakdown. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the breakdown of the Catholic Church in the 14th century. Okay, so 13th century, there's a rise in church power, but by the 14th century, the states have become much more powerful, and we're going to talk about why that happened. The first event is this: the new pope releases a document. It's called Unum Sanctum, and it's called a papal bull, which is just another way to describe an official church document. And it says power should rest with the church. So political power, worldly power, should rest with the church. Who was extremely against this? Well, the state. Ding, 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 ding. So make sure your first blank is the state. The state does not approve of this. The response: the French army sent by the King of France, Philip IV, sent to the Pope's home while he's on vacation, his vacation home, and they beat up the Pope, literally. This leads to French domination over the papacy, over the Catholic Church for a time, and they appoint their own Pope, Clement V. He's moved to Avignon, France, and this becomes known as the Avignon Papacy. From 1309 to 1377, there's a second Catholic power structure, right? And it's led by this man. And it's not in Rome anymore, it's in Avignon, France. This is a dramatic shift in power from the church to the ding 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 state. Okay, more power to the ding 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 state. So the church is having its share of problems because A, they beat up the Pope. You shouldn't do that. They created a new Pope. You're not supposed to do that. The people are going to start to question, where does this authority come from? How can we have 2 popes, right? And he gave it a new home. So he's given a new home at Avignon, France, along with the cardinals, the bishops, and the church becomes divided, which is a schism or a division. And that's why it's called the Great Schism, or as it's also called, is the Avignon Papacy. I talked to you about this problem already. The Pope's not in Rome, huh? Problem number 2, perception of Pope and bishops as vassals to France. Seemed that the Avignon clergy, the French clergy, they were selling out and lived like the rich. In other words, they're not doing their job as church leaders. They've forgotten about the poor, and they're living like the wealthy upper class. Sell out. Reaction to the French papacy. So, England, they did not like the French influence of the papacy. Biggest reason is it combined the Catholic power of the church with French political power. So, England says, no way. We don't want to see our biggest rival, France, become that powerful. The Papal States, Rome, where the church has historically been forever, they say, no way. You can't take the papacy from us. Bottom line, the church is being limited in power and French state is being strengthened. And Rome doesn't like that. The Holy Roman Empire doesn't like that. And England, France's rivals, do not like that either. So this is known as the Great Schism. Italy, where the Vatican is in Rome, never recognized the French Pope in Avignon as the rightful Pope. They recognized another man, Pope Gregory XI, as the rightful Pope. And that means at this time we have 2 popes, both the French Pope and Italian Pope. They claim to be the true Pope. And at this point, this is known as the Great Schism, when we have the reemergence of the Pope in Rome. So it's the splitting of the church. A schism is a split. And countries throughout Europe, remember, they're all Catholic. They have to choose which side they're on. So a big problem creates massive divisions between the French Avignon papacy and the Pope in Rome. So the church gets together. They hold a council to try to figure out what to do. This leads to more problems. They try to get rid of both popes and elect a new one, Alexander V. Neither pope stepped down. They said, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm the rightful pope. Now there's 3 popes, which is even worse than 2. And the people are starting to say, this is just not right. How does that work if the Pope is supposed to be chosen by God? Human error. Okay. So the church loses some credibility at this time. Not to say that people become anti-religious or non-Christian. Not at all. People just are forced to say something's not right here. And it leads to more power to the state and the people, and the church starts to lose some power. So that's it for now. Let's look at the ID. So we're going to jump back to our ID page. And I want you for now to get into good habits, to just write these actually out. Who, what, when, where, so what. So you can write these like this for now, okay? So who? Let's think before we go back to our lecture. We have our lecture to refer to, but who's involved? It's about the Catholic Church and the Pope, specifically French king, right? He moves papacy to Avignon. And we can make a note, that's known as the Avignon papacy. Okay. Okay, and then the Vatican, the original Holy Roman Church, says no and elects their own pope, which brings new characters. And then if we wanted to get more detail, we could add things about England and how other countries have to decide what's going to happen. But this is the basics. Who? What? Well, this creates division of church, creates the Great Schism, a time when there were two popes and centers of the Catholic Church. When? I mean, roughly the Great Schism, we have specific dates, 1377 to, and when you're not entirely sure, which is fine, you can do this on tests as well, to the beginning of the 1400s, which gives us a rough time period, because I don't believe I gave you the date for when the Great Schism officially ends. But it does end around the beginning of the 1400s. The church works out the issue, and the Pope in Rome is reinstated as the rightful Pope. And there's only one Pope by the beginning of the 1400s again. Where? We've already covered that. I mean, we got Avignon, France. That's where one Pope is. And then, of course, the Vatican, or Rome, where we can call it Pope number 2. And we would want to note that it impacts all of Europe. You can make a note. Have to decide which Pope / church they agree with. Okay, so what? Now we're thinking about so what. Okay, for now, for your IDs, I'm going to have you do it like this. Write out 2 ideas, and in this case, because we're talking so much about religion, I think that'd be one obviously we want to go with. So the religious impact, and then we're going to talk about the political impact. So one of the ways this impacted religion was people criticized and questioned their church leaders, right? And that is an important thing, because if we're starting to question our church leaders, that's a dramatic change in society. About it politically, because we see a decline in church power, we see a rise in the power of the state as the church authority declines. And that would complete our ID. So your ID might look something like that. Listen closely. I want you to do this for your homework. No quiz. Skip ID number 4, the Peasants' Revolt, and just do the ID for the 100 Years' War using the notes you have in the lecture for the 100 Years' War. That will be all. No quiz, Just finished the ID for the 100 Years' War, and we'll go over that tomorrow in class. Have a great night.